What else is going on, Ian?
The other one, it's not exactly a huge scoop in terms of a headline, but it's just new research came out pointing to how the growth in 8K TVs isn't escalating quite as people would have predicted a couple of years back. This comes from a global market research company called Omdia, which is currently predicting that by 2026, there'll be around 2.7 million households around the world that have an 8K TV. If you compare that to
that's infinitesimal, isn't it? When it boils down to
yeah. I mean, and if you compare that to a story we ran a couple of years ago where they were predicting there'll be over 50 million households by 2025. That's quite a steep drop off in terms of kind of the numbers they're expecting and the kind of the pickup of 8K TVs. Their research suggesting it was just 0.15% of TVs were shipped. I'm looking at stats, so it's around 350,000 units in 2021 with just 8K TVs. There's probably plenty of very obvious reasons why this is happening, why it's not progressing quite as quickly as some people might have hoped, or some people might not necessarily quite get the appeal of 8K at the moment in terms of the more mainstream users. But it's just interesting to see sort of that slowdown, the reasons that people are coming into it, and what people might want from 8K in the future to actually make it more viable.
The problem with 8K is it doesn't have any shiny bells and whistles to sell it. It's just purely resolution, which brings with it huge costs in terms of production. We're still struggling to get 4K content, and especially 4K film content where there's lots of special effects that are actually finished at 2K. Although a lot of disc releases are still 2K DIs that are then converted to 4K res for disc release and so on. So that's where we are, and that's where we've been for a number of years. The other thing is, in terms of physical media, there is no format for 8K in terms of physical media, so it'd have to be streaming. And again, serving that kind of content, whether it be broadcast or online and so on, it's still a hell of a lot of data, even with the latest compression technology and so on. So I think there's a lot of barriers. And the big one, Jules works with a lot of professional studios and so on. He goes in and calibrates all of their mastering equipment. The big problem is, Jules?
Well, nobody's grading at 8K. There's no monitors there. So most of the places I come across are still doing SDR content at 1080. And occasionally you'll get studios saying we've got, a BB, one of the Sony HDR monitors, but that's far outweighed by the SDR content that's being produced still. So we're way behind, into producing content for it. And the other thing, Phil, as well, is that most people in British lounges, when I go and calibrate in people's homes, they're not even sitting close enough to their TV to see the 4K resolution. So you're going to have a massive TV in your living room to get any benefit visually from 8K. And our living rooms just aren't up to it.
Yeah. So this office that I'm working in at the moment, the largest screens I can get in is the 65-inch, and I've had a couple of 65-inch 8Ks. I'm waiting on the 900 turning up this year for review as well. The problem is you put it next to a 4K TV, you sit at the same distance, and like you say, there is no real difference there in terms of resolution and so on. At least with 4K, when 4K was introduced, it came with HDR. HDR and 4K came hand in hand. I mean, you can have 1080 HDR; it's not a problem, and you've got HLG broadcast wise and so on. But with 4K, especially when it was a physical media release, it had HDR to go with it, which was a nice big uptick as well as wide color gamut to go with it. So 4K had the uptake, it had the uptake, and people were producing content in 4K as well, and it's easier to produce in 4K these days. So 8K's got a real struggle on its hands, especially in the UK. For a US audience who can and do have much larger screens, it's probably going to come a lot sooner for them, but it's certainly UK homes, anything over 65-inch, 77 is really pushing it, I think, in most normal homes, normal room size, it's starting to get very big then. So it'll be interesting. I keep saying that, but it will be interesting to see.
I think if they're going to do a physical format for it, it should be Laserdisc sized. If there's one thing we've sought, that it's not about practicality anymore. If you're going to do it, go balls out. It comes in a giant player the size of a fridge, and there's a real ceremony to it.
And we can get back to gatefold sleeves with all the artwork and the notes.
Think of it. It's just going to tick all the right boxes.
Yeah.
So that would be my suggestion. If you're going to do it, There's a phrase from Tropic Thunder which I probably can't use on a live podcast, but you need to do that basically. So
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So that's AV news. And if you got your thoughts on 8K, why you think it's not a success at the minute and not really taken off, or if you got your points of view on where you'd like to see things go in terms of 8K and so on, then of course you can use the comments in the comments section next to the podcast as it's live, or go to AVForums and head down, find the forum and leave your comments next to the podcast in there.